No, maybe
Let me just
did you write out a phrase and then you tried to say it naturally? Is that what it is?
No, it's not even included in my notes.
No, yeah, no more improvising. You did that last time, and it was just not working. Hey guys!
Hi.
Welcome back to our channel. I'm Kathy.
I'm Celeste.
Today Celeste is going to be telling us a story, so go get yourself a little warm drink and sit with us while she tells it to us.
Okay, so today I'm going to be telling you about the John Bodkin Adams case. And this case is pretty controversial, so just a heads up there. It's also pretty intense, so I would advise that you look at the content warnings in our description below. Let's jump into it.
Okay.
John was born January 21st, 1899 in Randallstown in Northern Ireland. He grew up in a religious community, specifically a Christian community. His dad, according to some sources, his dad was like pretty abusive. And then when John was 15 years old, his dad passed away. And then 4 years later, his brother William passed away from the flu.
Oh, wow.
So it was just John Bodkin Adams and his mom and his sister left. And so basically he had to be the one to provide for them. Here's a picture of him.
Oh, okay.
He was expected to take on the responsibility of taking care of his family now.
Sorry, hang on. I gotta open this real quick.
Okay. At this point, John was the main breadwinner in his family, and he decided that he wanted to become a doctor like his uncle. His uncle was also named John Bodkin. He was a renowned and well-respected Christian missionary and a doctor.
Oh, wow.
And so John was like, I want to be like that. I'm going to do the same thing, basically. He started going to medical school. And the pressure of taking care of his mom and his sister, like, started to get to him because it was just a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
He was still quite young, you know.
Yeah.
There was, like, no other way of getting money, you know.
Yeah.
Because, like, women couldn't work back then, basically.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Both of us?
So it was a lot of stress, and it ended up causing him to have an emotional breakdown while he was in school. And he barely graduated because of the stress. And how many struggles he had, but he overcame them and he ended up graduating. There was a surgeon that was a fan of John's uncle, and he was like, hey, like, if you want, you can come work for me. And John Jr. was like, heck yeah, that sounds great to me. And so he gave him a spot at the Bristol Royal Infirmary in 1920, and this jump started John's career. So from this point on, like, basically he was able to pursue his career, you know, and just like he was fully launched into that career path because of that.
Wow.
Then an ad in the newspaper stated that a group of practitioners were hiring someone to work at the practice, and the practice was specifically Christian, so it was a really good fit for him because he was also a religious practitioner. He got hired. He did really, really well, and he started making a lot of money, and he was in charge of his own clientele, so he decided that he wanted to work in Eastbourne in the UK, which is this beautiful seaside resort town. It's said to be the warmest place in the UK.
Wow.
Which is really cool. I'm like, we should go there.
Yeah.
So all the rich people would go there for vacationing and like to live. John was like, that's where I'm gonna go start my my clientele. So here's some pictures of Eastbourne.
Wow, that's gorgeous.
That's like one of the bigger resorts there.
Wow, right next to the water.
Here's like an old picture of the downtown. Lots of little stores and stuff.
Wow.
And then they have a whole resort that's on the boardwalk. Which is so wild.
That's wild.
So it wasn't long before John was able to fully support his family and like start making lots of money. Finally had some spending money, so he wasn't just able to support his family, he was able to like spend money. He loved going to his patients' mansions and like looking at all their stuff. Like he loved being around people who had lots of money. He just loved being a part of that.
Yeah.
And he wanted that for himself, he wanted to be in the high class. He wanted to be a part of that, you know? And he was getting close to being there. He was making lots of money being a doctor in this area. And so he started wearing super expensive clothing and going to the same events and restaurants as his clients would go to. He like wanted to be a part of that, you know? Like it was very, especially during that time frame, there were established classes and like you had to do a lot to be a part of those classes to even get into the same kinds of events, restaurants. Like you had to look the part. And so that's what he was doing. He was looking the part. He started becoming friends with his patients that were really, really rich, and his practice started to grow and grow. It obviously was really inappropriate, like, to be friends with your doctor. And obviously, like, in today's day and time, like, that would be completely unacceptable, you know? Like, you shouldn't be friends with your doctor. Like,
back then, when he was, like, hanging out with his friends, like, his rich friends and clients and everything, did they think it was weird? Or was that, like, it was okay because it was, like, just, like, a bunch of rich people?
I feel like they were fine with it. John was a Christian doctor who seemed like he came from money. And so I feel like the rich people there probably were like, he's just a nice Christian guy. He's so nice. You know?
He's
like,
just Christian.
He's our guy. Like, it's fine. So, and also he would do a lot for his patients. Like, he would go above and beyond. He was always on call for his patients. Like, people just knew that they could depend on him. He had created, like, a really firm relationship with people before becoming friends with them. So it was like they trusted him, you know? He was like the best kind of doctor out there that they could get that was like, you know, a fancy guy, you know?
He really put on that persona of like a rich Christian doctor.
Yeah, exactly. And when he first started out in Eastbourne, he would ride a bicycle to his appointments. By this point, he was able to afford a car, and he really upgraded his whole life, so he was able to get a car. In 1923, John met some of his most important clients in Eastbourne. They were named William and Edith Mawhood. William had a successful cutlery business, so he was like doing really, really well for himself. They were like the epitome of high-class English people, and so John was like, I love them, like they're everything to me. He began prioritizing them over his other patients, and it's possible that maybe he felt like he needed their approval because they were like those fancy, you know, English people that he loved. Despite that, he still was going above and beyond for them, you know. Edith ended up breaking her leg, and John wasn't qualified to, like, do anything about that, so he found a really, really good surgeon for them. He was really persistent in helping them and getting close to them. He started making house calls regularly, so he would make house calls and he would just show up. He would do that all the time. The Mawhoods were just like, whatever.
They liked him.
Yeah, they liked him, so they didn't, like, think anything of it.
So
the visits became more and more frequent, and then after a little while, his behavior started to get a little bit more odd. He would walk through their house and point out their personal belongings and be like, this is really nice. He would ask to borrow some of their stuff.
What?
They thought that it was just because he admired them, because when he would ask to, like, use their stuff, he would be like, he would tell them, like, I love you, you know, like, please let me borrow this. And then at one point, William Mawhood was wearing a really nice jacket. John was like, I really like that jacket. Where'd you get it? And William told him where he got it. John went and got the exact same jacket from the same tailor.
Oh my god.
And he charged it to the Mawhoods. They tried waving off his behavior because they were like, he's just, you know,
he's a Christian doctor.
Like, then he asked them to purchase him a set of steel surgical tools, and they did. Back then, it was a lot more common for people to become close to their doctors. Like, it was just a normal thing, you know, because like, it's somebody you're spending a lot of time with. They're like coming to your house. It was just different back then. But even with that being said, his behavior was still considered really inappropriate. Like, you shouldn't be asking people to buy you stuff. Although he was being really, really weird with the Mawhoods, his reputation continued growing because he had so many people in his corner already that it was just like, people were just like, whatever. He would go to stores and charge items to other patients, not just the Mawhoods. He was a hot commodity because all the rich people loved him, you know? And because he did develop these, like, relationships with people where he would get them to trust him, you know? And I don't know if there was any ill intent behind that, but I think that from what I can see, a lot of people really, really did love him so much. Yeah.
Like, he took the time to get to know people, it seemed like.
Yeah.
You know?
When William Mahood finally died in 1949, John visited Edith uninvited, and he took a 22-karat gold pen from her bedroom dressing table, saying that he wanted something of William's.
Wow.
And then he never came back.
Wow.
Yeah. Her husband just died.
Literally.
You're just gonna come in?
And steal, like, a super expensive pen and then never come back and check on her?
I know.
That's so rude.
Yeah. By 1930, John owned an 8-bedroom house where he lived with his mother and his sister.
Wow.
And he had chauffeurs driving him around in his cars, and he was doing really, really well for himself. But his behavior just was getting more and more suspicious and strange. And it began to interfere with his career. So he diagnosed a patient with gallstones, and he was insistent that they had gallstones. He was like, you have to go get surgery, like, to get these taken out, because, like, you're gonna die if you don't. Like, you have to go get surgery right now.
Oh my God.
And the patient was like, well, I just want to get a second opinion. And so they got a second opinion, and the doctor was like, you literally don't have gallstones.
Wow. For
You know?
what?
Yeah, exactly. For what? Another patient was having issues with her eye after a tennis accident. And John was like, listen, like, you can't see. I think that maybe I should take care of your finances and affairs. Maybe you could just write me as, like, your power of attorney, and I'll just take care of, like, your finances since you can't see.
What?
Yeah. He was like, you can't sign the checks or anything, so let me help you.
Oh my God, please tell me this lady didn't fall for that.
She went to her friend, and she was like, what do you think I should do? And the friend was like, I don't know, dude. Like, I don't think you should give him the
All of
power
your money.
over your finances. Yeah. She changed her mind, and she was like, I don't think I'm gonna do that. And John was, according to some sources, he was pretty upset about that.
Tells you all you need to know about this man.
His reputation finally started to change, and patients were saying that he was being kind of weird. Like, he would schedule them for unnecessary and expensive appointments that were, like, just not needed.
Yeah.
And sometimes expensive operations that were not necessary.
Ooh.
And then in 1933, John met a woman named Matilda Whitten, who was in her 70s, and she was a rich widow who lived at a local hotel. She was pretty vulnerable, and she needed somebody who could provide around-the-clock care for her because she didn't have any family nearby, and she didn't have any friends. And so John was kind of the perfect fit for her. You know, like, he's this well-renowned doctor. He's known to, like, prioritize his patients. He's known to, like, really help people with, you know, being alone. And so she was like, I want him. They built rapport pretty quickly, and then John began to provide her with rides to different places. Like, he would drive her places. And it got to the point where they were so close that she became friends with his mother and his sister. They were just close. She ended up buying him a car, which was obviously not a cheap gift, but
Yeah,
what
holy
was-
crap.
Yeah. What was even more shocking was that she took her stepkids out of the will, and she left the remaining of her affairs to John. Matilda lived in a hotel, right? After a short period of time, the hotel staff started noticing that she would act out of it when she was with John, and then when she wasn't with John, she would be a little bit more energetic and stuff. And this suggested that maybe John was giving her drugs. As we know, morphine and opiates were used a lot in the 19th century for pain relief, and they were both made commercially at the time. Many doctors specifically would use it to help their patients with morning sickness, menstrual cramps, and diseases of a nervous character, aka anxiety.
Wow.
So it's not totally uncommon that John would maybe give somebody these medications because it was normal back then.
Yeah.
It wasn't a big deal back then.
Yeah.
But what was more of a concern was that maybe he was over drugging her, you know? Maybe she was getting the drugs from him, and that was all fine and dandy, but maybe the hotel staff was like, but why is she, like, always high all the time, you know?
Yeah, and especially when she's with him.
Yeah.
Why is she less coherent when she's with him?
Exactly. She was in her 70s in the 19th century, so on top of all of that, being old in general is hard.
Yeah.
And right now, even with, like, the advancements in medicine that we have, I can't imagine how difficult it would have been back then, you know, like, being old. There was a nurse that was working with Matilda at the time, and she thought that John was being shady. Like, she didn't trust him.
That's wild. As the hospital staff, stuff, you know, I bet they were like, they probably felt so helpless, you know, because they would know. And back then I feel like now we have rules because, you know, there's things that we can look out for to know if people are being drugged. But like back then, not only that, it's also illegal, so the hospital can intervene, you know.
Yeah.
But back then, it was different, you know.
Yeah, and it's like doctors would go to your house or wherever you were at. Like they would visit you, and probably with Matilda, he would visit her in her like private hotel room. You know?
Exactly.
So it was really different back then. She passed away in May of 1935 after conveniently disinheriting all of her will to her stepchildren and giving John a car. John walked away with 7,385 pounds, and 1 pound in 1935 was the equivalent to about 67 pounds in 2017. It wasn't a small amount of money. It was a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
Matilda had about 11,000 pounds, so John basically just wiped her out.
Wow.
Yeah. Her stepchildren, they ended up challenging John in court, but they lost the court case. John won.
Wow.
Until he walked away with everything that he already had.
Wow.
Yeah. After that, John started receiving letters in the mail telling him not to bump off any more wealthy widows. So even though people were saying that he was like really untrustworthy, he still had like the wealthiest clients in the area.
That's crazy.
I know.
Wow.
So the incident with Matilda may have saved another elderly woman's life, and her name was Agnes Pike. In August of 1939, John started treating Agnes with barbiturates and morphine. Over time, her behavior became a lot more erratic. People in her life were really concerned. So they went to another doctor, and the other doctor took a look at her, and he was like, I don't see any reason why she should be taking this much like medication.
Oh my god.
He asked John, like, why are you what are you doing? John was like offended that they had brought in a second opinion. Later during the examination, John stepped forward and unexpectedly injected Agnes with morphine. And when Dr. Matthew was like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
John said that she might get violent. And
What?
Dr. Matthews also found that John had banned all of her relatives from seeing her. So at this point, the family was like, we're taking this into our own hands.
Yeah, that's so scary.
Like, they did not want him to be taking care of her anymore.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So they took Agnes out of John's care. About 2 months later, she was back to her normal self, back to her regular routine. She wasn't acting erratic anymore. She was able to just like get her shopping done, do her normal routine. Matilda Whitten and Agnes Pike were part of situations that caused John's reputation to be jeopardized. And doctors began having a negative view of John as well. So not just the public, but also his fellow practitioners were starting to not like him as much because they were like, you are sketchy, like, we don't believe what you got going on. And so they cut him out of their arrangements after World War II. Some doctors had gained more patients because of the war, which meant that the business would grow and they would get more clientele. And World War II began in 1939, and then during the war, John stayed in Eastbourne. However, by this point, word had gotten around about Agnes and Matilda, so rumors were spreading, and his reputation was so damaged by this point that the doctors were like, we're just gonna take patients on of our own. They excluded him from all of their plans, but he still had access to jobs because he was a great doctor on paper. So like he could still get clients, like it wasn't hard for him. And then the hospital was suffering from staff shortages during World War II, so John got a job there. While he was there, he earned his diploma in anesthetics, which would be for anesthesia, He worked one day a week in the hospital, and similar to other places he worked, he got a not so great reputation. He would fall asleep during operations. He would mix up the anesthetic gas tubes, so it would cause patients to wake up during an operation and their hands would start to turn blue. He would eat cakes, count money. And then in 1943, John's mom passed away, so all he had left was his sister. And John had never been married, but he was briefly engaged in the 30s, but his engagement had been broken because there were rumors that his fiance found out that he was gay. And being gay was illegal back then. So
you know who this guy reminds me of? Remember that that podcast
Dr. Death.
Dr. Death, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is exactly what I think of.
Yeah. So after the war, John was still flourishing, and he was known as one of the wealthiest doctors in England. And people thought that that meant that he was the best, you know. Inevitably, his clientele continued to grow. John's clientele included some of the wealthiest people in England, and some of his patients were Olympic medal winners. One of his patients was Oswald Burley, who is a painter. Also, Eastbourne's chief constable, Richard Walker, and a lot of other people. And one of the most influential patients that John took care of was Edward Cavendish, who was the Duke of Devonshire. John was there when the Duke died, and he had died of a heart attack in 1950, but when John signed the Duke's death certificate, he claimed that the death was of natural causes.
Wow.
Yeah. And there should have been an inquest since his death was so sudden, but John didn't notify the coroner.
Of course he didn't.
Yeah, this could have been because, like, he had been acting so sketchy, so he was like, I don't want people to get on my tail about it, you know?
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah. But his luck didn't seem to last long, because in 1956, a patient of John's passed away and things began to change for him. So after the heart attack and death of her husband, Bobby Gertrude suffered from severe depression. And Bobby had been receiving treatment from John, and he was prescribing her sleeping pills, and they weren't working. John ended up introducing her to his friend named Alfred Hullett, who had also lost his spouse. They got super close and they started developing a romantic relationship together, and then they ended up getting married in 1952.
Wow.
But everything fell apart again when Alfred also passed away from a heart attack. On March 14th, 1956, Alfred Hullett passed away, leaving his wife, Bobby Gertrude Hullett, a widow. John had diagnosed Alfred with bowel cancer and sent him to a surgeon in London to have the cancer removed. And something went wrong during the operation, and Alfred was left in a lot of pain. He was sick for 3 months, which caused Bobby to go through, you know, the same stress that she had already been through with her previous husband.
Yeah.
And she started to, you know, get really, really stressed. And so John prescribed Alfred painkillers and opiates to help with the pain. And Alfred saw a heart specialist who said that he was likely experiencing issues from, like, a heart condition that he seemed to have from the time that he was a child. And on top of that, he suspected that the cancer would come back. So basically, he said that Alfred had a really, really short time to live. And on March 13th, Alfred suffered from severe pains in his chest consistent with a heart attack. A nurse who was there stated that John had injected Alfred with morphine at 10:30 p.m. and Alfred died 8 hours later.
Wow.
So when this happens, Bobby is obviously really upset because she's already gone through the passing of her first husband, and now she has to go through it again.
So soon, too.
Yeah, so soon, too. Not only that, but Alfred passed away from the same thing that her previous husband passed away from. So it's just like to relive the trauma of losing someone you love, and then on top of that, lose them from the exact same thing. Like, I just feel like that's so much to go through.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, and she started to spiral after this because it was just heavy, you know?
Oh, poor woman.
John prescribed her a dose of barbiturates to help her cope with her depression. It was helping, but for the most part, she started showing signs of addiction. And people started noticing that, and they suspected that John was giving her morphine secretly. So her friends were becoming more worried because along with her behavior changing, she started making comments about suicide. Her maid became so concerned that she wanted to go to the police, but the other house staff were like, no, don't do that, don't go to the police. She also wrote John a 1,000-pound check for him to get a car that her husband had promised him, and then she fell into a coma. John wasn't available, so another doctor came. He determined that the cause of the coma was because of an overdose. But when John arrived, he disagreed with the cause of death, and he said that it was likely a cerebral hemorrhage. Even though John made it clear that he had nothing to do with the overdose, when the doctor left, he injected Bobby with chloramine, which was often used to help with barbiturate overdoses. And so that basically proved that that's what he thought it was.
Yeah.
But it was given to Bobby too late, and it didn't revive her. And so he told Bobby's family, again, he repeats the same thing, hey, she's having a cerebral hemorrhage. bitch. Don't worry, like, she'll be okay. He developed a relationship with them and got their trust. And as soon as he did that, he went to the hospital and he asked a fellow doctor how to treat barbiturate overdose. The doctor said that he could use Megamide, which is a stimulant. And the doctor gave him very specific dosage information. He was like, this is exactly how you do it. You can't do it any other way or it's not going to work. So John went back to where Bobby was and he set up the IV, but he didn't follow the doctor's instructions and he ended up giving her other drugs on top of that. Bobby came through the coma a few times, but she would always fall back into it. Bobby ended up passing away on July 23rd, 1956. And again, the rumors blew up, but this time it was different because these rumors were being taken a lot more seriously. There were rumors going around talking about how John was like so sure that it was not an overdose, but then this other doctor was like, yes, it was. It literally was an overdose, you know? They pointed out that he had lied about that because he literally went to another doctor and said, how should I treat this barbiturate overdose?
Exactly.
So it was a whole shebang.
Wow.
This didn't add up, you know?
Yeah.
The coroner got a second opinion and they found that Bobby's true cause of death was bronchopneumonia and respiratory failure, which could have been caused by barbiturate poisoning. They didn't understand why John would lie about this since he literally got Megamide from another provider for Bobby. An inquest was unavoidable at this point, you know? They're just like, this is so sketchy, you know? And if you remember from the Marilyn and Sam Shepard case, he wasn't just a liar and a cheater, but that he also had motive for murder. And rumors started flying around and all of a sudden everybody was like, it was you, you know, and they were being so freaking intense.
Wow.
And on July 21st, the press released a headline on a paper that said, why no inquest? Do it now, Dr. Gerber. So basically, the public was demanding that Dr. Gerber question Sam and do it in front of everyone. And so he did.
Oh.
A medical inquest is held to discuss the conditions of a certain suspicious death. So they'll like get a bunch of people together and they'll ask questions and they'll try to figure out like what happened, what actually happened. The media started digging up every story they could on John and ended up coming across the Matilda Witten case.
Oh my gosh.
But this wasn't the only thing that they uncovered. They also found that he was the beneficiary of hundreds of wills in the area.
Wow. Hundreds.
Yeah.
Holy shoot.
Yeah. So an inquest was formed by the Scotland Yard, which refers specifically to a branch of the London police called the Criminal Investigation Department. So the Scotland Yard is basically like the CSI or like, you know, like...
Oh, like the...
You know, like Criminal Investigation Department.
Yeah.
You know, like...
Except that British.
Yeah, British. Exactly. So the evidence didn't look good for John, especially considering the treatment of Bobby. But the judge, in his summing up, concluded that even though the doctor had been negligent, that he didn't cross the line into criminal negligence.
What?
So he told the jury that the decision that they had to make was between accidental overdose and suicide, and they chose suicide.
Wow.
Yeah. Obviously, John didn't get arrested for the situation with Bobby, even though there was a lot of strange circumstances that went into that.
Yeah.
People were still really suspicious of him, and at this point, the Scotland Yard decided they weren't going to let this go. They were going to dig deeper, and they were going to try and figure out if they can pin something on him.
Good.
But as they were investigating, they ran into an issue. The British Medical Association sent out letters to all of the providers that had any association with John. And they were like, you can't talk about him. There is such thing as doctor-to-doctor confidentiality, and you can't break that. Essentially telling them to keep hush-hush when the police are asking questions.
Wow.
Yeah. Despite this, the Scotland Yard, specifically an officer named Detective Superintendent Herbert Hannum, dug up a bunch of cases that John had connection to, and the cases dated back to 1935 and were mostly built up of his clients that were wealthy widows. One case in particular had them scratching their heads, and that was the case of Edith Morel. She was a woman who had suffered from a stroke, but for the following 2 years she became stable, and at the time she was under the care of John. John would give her nightly injections of morphine and heroin. After her death, John received silver, some money, her Rolls Royce, and her lamp. He also billed the family for 1,100 visits, costing in 1,674 pounds total.
Wow. The fact that he would bill the family after he took everything from her?
Yeah, and also, like, is it even possible to have that many visits?
Yeah, what the f***?
So many visits.
That's so many visits.
But that's not the only weird thing.
Oh my god.
When she died November 13th, 1950, John slit her wrist to make sure that she was dead.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Whoa, I was not expecting
I
that.
know. Now, Detective Hannum had enough evidence to go on. So on November 24th, 1956, a search warrant was obtained. And they went to John's house, demanding to see his dangerous drugs register, which is a book that keeps a list of controlled substances that have been prescribed to patients. He admitted that he didn't have a register, even though that was illegal. And they searched his medical cabinet. And when John opened it up for them, they were shocked to find that the medications were like mixed in with a bunch of random stuff like chocolate, margarine, butter, like it was like mixed in.
What?
And so in other words, John wasn't like keeping his controlled substances cabinet clean and organized like you would expect a doctor to.
Yeah.
So after that happened, they saw him slip 2 bottles into his pockets.
Right after they checked his medicine cabinet?
Yeah. So they were like, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
He said that one of the bottles was for Annie Sharp, who was a patient and a major witness who had died 9 days earlier. And the other bottle, he said, was for a patient who also died, who had no record of being treated with morphine. So this was enough for them to take him in to be investigated, because they were like, why are you lying and why are you trying to hide it?
Yeah.
Basically. And when he was in the police station, this is what John stated: easing the passing of a dying person isn't all that wicked. She wanted to die. That can't be murder. It is impossible to accuse a doctor.
Wow.
John was arrested on November 24th, 1956 on 13 charges, including forging prescriptions and lying on cremation forms, but he was released on bail.
Oh my gosh, why?
Yeah. Because he was rich.
Yeah.
Detective Hannum and the other police decided to dig up all of John's pharmacy receipts that they could find.
Mm-hmm.
When they did, they were shocked because they found receipts showing that John had purchased 5,000 barbiturate tablets. And they also found that Miss Morrell was receiving 4 orders from the pharmacy a week.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
And they determined that the amount of drugs that she was taking should have killed her.
Wow.
But she had died several years earlier, so they had no way of proving this. Like, they had no way of,
checking DNA.
Yeah.
Wow.
Detective Hannum convinced the Crown to arrest John. So he was arrested again on December 19th, 1956, and he was charged with the murder of Edith Morrell. So John's trial finally started March 19th, 1957. The prosecution told the jury about the drugs that Miss Morrell was on. The prosecution relied on 3 things. They relied on the amounts of drugs that were prescribed by John. They also relied on Miss Morrell's statements that were taken by her nurses, and John admitting that he injected almost all the drugs that were prescribed. So the prosecution felt like the public was on their side. They did everything right. They were ready to like take him down. They brought in a doctor to testify that stated morphine should never be used as treatment after a stroke, and that John had the intention to kill Miss Morrell, and he walked the jury through how John would have done that. The defense countered by showing the jury that morphine was used to treat her before she was even under John's care. Morphine was included in the treatment plan that was made by the hospital, so it wasn't John's choice to give her this medication.
Conveniently enough.
Yeah. The defense pointed out that the morphine was used to treat Miss Morrell's pain as she was about to die. They also pointed out that John made the last moments as painless as possible, and that John was simply following the treatment plan of the hospital. The trial lasted 17 days, which was the longest murder trial recorded in Britain at the time. On April 9th, 1957, the jury deliberated for 45 minutes before deciding that John was not guilty of the murder of Edith Morrell.
Wow. I feel like when you put it in that context, yeah, like he was easing her pain, but you have to put the whole thing into context. The hundreds of wills he's in, the bunch of mysterious deaths he's been a part of,
Yeah. So with the lack of evidence, they couldn't charge him with murder, but John was still punished, and his license to prescribe dangerous drugs was revoked, and later he was removed from the medical register, so he wasn't allowed to be a physician in the UK.
Good.
Yeah. So after the trial, John gave an exclusive interview to the only reporter who was in his corner and told his side of the story. He even went on to sue a few of the papers who basically just said really, really bad things about him that were blatantly not true. He won those. He won those lawsuits.
Wow.
And he went on to start his own private practice, and he led a quiet life until he went on a hunting trip and broke his leg, and his his injuries led to complications, and he passed away July 4th, 1983, at the age of 83 years old.
Wow.
And some people believe that he was a serial killer. Other people believe that he was just somebody who assisted people who were close to death. That's the case of John Bodkin Adams.
Wow.
AKA the original Dr. Death.
That's insane. I think he was a bad guy.
Yeah,
I do.
that's fair.
Because I feel like, okay, maybe let's say he was assisting all these people dying, you know? That's
Yeah.
great. Good for you. But like, I don't know. It just feels sketchy.
Yeah.
Like all the dirty medicine everywhere, you know, like the medicine cabinet, him not being very organized, stuff like that.
Yeah. Either way, it's a really interesting case.
Yeah, absolutely. Good job. That was really
Thank you.
cool.
Did we finish our makeup on time?
I think we actually finished our makeup this time. Like, oh my god. I think this is the first time that this has ever happened.
This is the first time this has ever happened.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you enjoyed the story. I thought it was a really interesting one. I'd love to know what your opinions are. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yeah.
And we'll be back with more videos, baby.
Yeah.
We're working on something right now so that we can be more consistent. So, yeah. Get ready for our Halloween episode that's coming later this month.
I'm so excited for that.
Have a good day.
Bye.